really what we're concerned about, again, is those centrifuges and that fissile material. And that you can't see from satellite imagery.
The US and Israel have launched an attack on Iran, with President Donald Trump confirming that major combat operations are underway. Iran has reportedly responded by targeting US bases in Kuwait, the UAE, Qatar and Bahrain. In a video posted to his Truth Social, the US president outlined his justification for the military intervention.
But Iran refused, just as it has for decades and decades. They've rejected every opportunity to renounce their nuclear ambitions, and we can't take it anymore. Instead, they attempted to rebuild their nuclear program and to continue developing long-range missiles that can now threaten our very good friends and allies in Europe, our troops stationed overseas, and could soon reach the American homeland. For these reasons, the United States military is undertaking a massive and ongoing operation to prevent this very wicked, radical dictatorship from threatening America and our core national security interests.
Well, joining us to discuss this is Darya Dolzikova, a senior research fellow with RUSI's Proliferation and Nuclear Policy Programme. Darya, thank you for giving us your time. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Darya, let's just focus on what we heard there from the president. This imminent threat referring to Iran's nuclear capability. What do we know of that capability, particularly after the last attack, which was meant to have completely obliterated Iran's nuclear capability?
Well, so that's part of the issue, is that we don't actually have a very clear picture of what the impact of the last round of strikes was on Iran's nuclear program. I mean, the general kind of consensus tends to be that the last round of strikes didn't obliterate the program, but did set it back quite significantly. There were, in particular, concerns, persistent concerns, rather, over the continued potential for Iran to rebuild and potentially still pose a proliferation risk. So in particular, those concerns were focused on, among other things, but primarily whether and where Iranian highly enriched uranium stocks survived. So that's the material that would actually go inside of a nuclear weapon. And then whether any centrifuges, so the equipment that would be needed to get that material to a point where it would be usable in a nuclear weapon, whether those machines survived and where they might be. There are other parts of the program that, again, are still of concern, but those are kind of the key things. And again, a fair bit of lack of clarity, if you will, on both those things. And that will only become harder now with these attacks as well.
We heard earlier today from former Defense Secretary Ben Wallace that the enriched plutonium had reached 80%, which is quite high, not quite the 90% needed for nuclear weapons. Do we know where Iran has got to with enrichment of plutonium at the moment? I suppose there's no one there monitoring it, but what do we know?
So I've not seen those remarks particularly. There's been a lot of data and information to process through this morning. But basically what we know of the program as it had been before the June strikes was that Iran was enriching uranium to 60%. There had been an instance maybe a couple of years ago, where the International Atomic Energy Agency did record Iran having, or it found some trace materials that had been enriched up to 83%. Iran managed to explain that away in a way that the IAEA did find credible, that it wasn't intentionally enriching to that level, certainly wasn't stockpiling materials to that level, but nevertheless, they were enriching to 60%. We know that. And that is quite close to what we would consider weapons grade. Now, what has been happening to that enriched uranium since, again, very hard to know, in large part because Iran has denied access to the International Atomic Energy Agency to the targeted facilities where that material would have been most likely since the June strikes.
Darya, we are now bringing reports of counterstrikes from Iran, missiles heading towards Israel, quite a few of them targeting bases all across the region, US bases across the region. What do we know of Iran's military capabilities away from nuclear weapons when it comes to short and long range missiles?
Yeah, so that's obviously been another concern for the administration as well. I mean, most of what was targeted today, again, as far as we can tell, still very, very early hours, has been Iran's missile capabilities. So this is something that it's a threat that Iran has posed to the region. Obviously, the regional actors are concerned. I would argue more so about Iran's missile capabilities than they are about Iran's nuclear capabilities, because it's the former that is most likely to target regional actors. However, those missile capabilities, as we've seen, can also be used against to retaliate against U.S. and other assets in the region. And also, there have been some reports of Iran transferring potentially missile capabilities, certainly drones, to support Russia in its war in Ukraine as well.
I mean, Donald Trump hinted there that Iran could pose a direct threat to U.S. Territory. I'm not quite sure whether he meant the United States itself rather than their assets across the globe. But I mean, is there any realistic chance of Iran being able to strike the United States?
No, so Iran doesn't have an international, or sorry, an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile capability. So he was most likely talking about U.S. regional assets.
And what do we know about the origin of much of the Iranian military? You mentioned drones, which, you know, in covering the last few years of the war in Ukraine, we know that drones play a massive part. But what do we know about where their military equipment come from? Is it supplied by Russia? We know that Russia has condemned these strikes. Is there a lot of Chinese military equipment getting into Iran? Where do we know about the origin of that military equipment?
Yeah, well, so I mean, it'll be a mix. Iran is a technologically advanced country, so a lot of that technology is domestically developed. So, in fact, Iran has been on the other side of the proliferation equation, if you will, oftentimes, so proliferating to its regional proxies and allies, and to allies abroad as well. But we know that historically there have been reports of Iran cooperating with the North Koreans, for example, and developing some of its more advanced missile capabilities as well. So within those countries, I mean, like I said, there have been reports of kind of transfers and cooperation historically. But like I said, Iran's a very advanced country itself. So a lot of that will be domestically developed as well.
And just finally, Darya, of course, as we started our conversation, all the focus has been on Iran's nuclear capabilities. Without having teams on the ground to investigate this, is there a way of knowing the state of Iran's nuclear program, how advanced it is, how set back it's been after these recent attacks? Is there a way of knowing remotely, or can you only tell when you put boots to the ground?
It's extremely difficult to know very much remotely. A lot of these facilities had been / are underground. Again, we don't really know the current state of those sites. There is some things we can learn from satellite imagery. So there's been some good satellite imagery analysis from folks in the open source intelligence expert community that have seen, for instance, Iran hardening a number of its facilities, presumably in expectation of renewed strikes against those sites. But really what we're concerned about, again, is those centrifuges and that fissile material. And that you can't see from satellite imagery. You need to really have people on the ground, ideally the International Atomic Energy Agency, because they're the ones that have the mandate and the expertise to actually evaluate and assess and monitor this equipment and material. But you do need boots on the ground, not necessarily boots on the ground, but people on the ground to assess the state of those capabilities and materials.